Hey everyone, welcome to the Adventum Mindfulness Triathlon. We're doing a talk today with a special guest, Toni Dussex in Longview, Texas. She is the owner of Freedom Yoga, which is the only trauma-informed yoga studio in East Texas. And she's a certified instructor, 200 hours. And I love that she implements these beautiful practices when she's teaching. It's trauma informed and it's trauma sensitive. And today that's what we're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about trauma. We're gonna talk about yoga and how yoga is so beneficial and is a beautiful tool to help facilitate your healing process. And Toni, thank you so much for coming on, for being a part of this. And if you guys remember, Toni was at our event last year and she did the sound bowls, which was pretty phenomenal.
Thank you.
It was
Thank you
awesome.
for having me, Colleen. I'm so honored to do this interview with you and be a part of the triathlon again this year.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I know we were talking earlier. I'm so grateful for your story and that you've experienced so much in your life and it plays such a huge role in where you are today and your passion for yoga and for helping people and for all the different types of people that come into your studio that have experienced PTSD. You are a PTSD survivor, and your story, you have experienced a lot of tragedy in your life, and you've also experienced a lot of healing as well. And your story offers so much hope. And would you please share what your journey has been that's led you to this place right here?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for holding space for me and my story. I'm going to start by something that you said the other day that kind of, I don't know, it's helped to settle my nerves every time I've thought about, opening up and sharing everything, kind of laying it all out there. You said, in order to understand the gravity of my healing, it needs to be understood the gravity of my trauma. So I really love that you said that, and I'm totally going to snag that from you. But so literally one of my very first memories was a trauma. And you kind of have to, I don't know, I feel like I am going to kind of cycle through a lot of stuff, but I had a lot of childhood trauma, really mostly involving like illnesses and accidents and things like that. And then, so like fast forward to high school, I'm pretty sure I had PTSD like long before it was ever diagnosed. But each year of high school, I lost a friend, tragically.
Wow.
Then my freshman year, my mom was always sick pretty much my entire childhood. And then my freshman year, she was involved in a car accident, which left her brain damage. She was in a coma. She had a stroke while she was in a coma. So she came out of that worse than before. And then the kind of my caretaker role as her daughter, I'm an only child. It was my dad and I both kind of took care of her, but especially after that accident, and she could no longer drive. She was epileptic. And then, so that was freshman year. And then, each year I experienced some sort of loss. And then right after high school, I know I'm going to leave some stuff out, but right after high school, I went in to get my very first actual job. I walked into Outback and literally saw this just beautiful man. He was just like this radiating, just beautiful soul that I could just see from the inside out. And I don't think I'd ever really thought about love at first sight, but that was definitely the case with us. His name was Matt, and he interviewed me. And then there's this funny story. We have several people that actually like still love to tell the story about he had gone into the kitchen and held up my application and kind of declared that he was hiring his wife. And I went home and told my parents that I couldn't even remember his name, but I was going to marry him and all this stuff. So that's kind of how our story began. He was just a wonderful, wonderful person. And so that kind of ties in. So that was 1999. In 2000, my mom passed away, and I was still kind of grieving that for several years. We were very close. But my husband was kind of in line to get his own restaurant and become the proprietor. So we had moved to Texarkana. Oh, I skipped right over one of my best parts. In 2002, we had a son. So I had my baby. Yes. Yes. Very important part of the story.
Important part, yes.
Yes. 2002. So my mom passed away in 2000. And then that was the year that we got married also. And then 2002, we had our son. In 2003, we moved to Texarkana, and he got that Outback, and we were there for 3 months. And he and 2 of his managers, which were also our friends, were murdered on Labor Day. So, like I said, I'm pretty sure I had PTSD just from childhood and all the stuff. And then that was literally debilitating. So I was 22 years old, single mom of a 15-month-old child. And then the way that it happened, all the layers of trauma from that, figuring out who did it, and then having to go through trials, and that being prolonged 2 years. I mean, the first one was a year after, and then the second one was 2 years after. 2 weeks after my husband was killed, I was actually robbed by the moving company that was hired to move us.
Oh my gosh. Just
trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. So my journey with yoga had started, it actually kind of started in high school, but not anything serious. After high school, I'd done some yoga and really loved it. And really, before I knew anything about it, I thought I was good at it because I was flexible. But I don't think there's such a thing as being good at yoga anymore. But anyway, I lost my track of my train of thought.
So you started doing yoga?
Yeah. Oh, I had a little bit of yoga experience. And then when fast forward or back to when we were in Texarkana, after he was killed, we moved back to Longview. And I didn't do anything as far as yoga was concerned until like 7 years later, I guess. And that's kind of how I got back into it, was with all the PTSD, the depression, the anxiety. I was heavily medicated. I was seeing a therapist who was not trauma informed, and there was actually some more trauma that came from that. But I started after just being medicated for so long. Number one, I had tried multiple antidepressants. I was on Ativan and Xanax and sleeping pills and all kinds of things just to, get through the day without constant panic attacks.
Sure.
But when my son started school is when I had to make a decision of, what am I really going to do here? I can't drive him to school or pick him up if I'm high on Xanax.
Yeah.
So, and it was, it's one thing when you have PTSD and you're able to stay home. And that was something that I had the privilege of being able to do after my husband was killed, which was a blessing. But it also I think that allowed me to kind of hinder my growth or not heal for so long, because I was able to not do anything. But anytime I'd have to even leave the house, it was, I would have such bad anxiety that it was just a mess. So I finally reached the point where I was like, I've got to do something. I can't keep up this way. It was a constant, I constantly, basically planned and daydreamed about suicide. And if it weren't for my son, I know for a fact I wouldn't be here. I basically just refused to be the one who took away his other parent.
Yeah.
So he kept me here. And then, anyway, so I just got tired of being medicated and still feeling horrible, just basically just masking the symptoms temporarily, but not doing anything to actually heal or recover. So I got back into yoga. I started doing research and got back into yoga. And then eventually that led to me getting trained and certified. And then my very first yoga training is when they had just rolled out the Yoga Fit for Warriors program, it was initially created for military veterans. But then they started realizing that there were people like me who were non-military that needed it just as bad. So I got started on that program, and within that, gained just a ton of healing and knowledge, and that's how I got to where I'm at now. So
that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
And for opening up, and that it's always humbling, because it's that's a very intense time of your life. To open up and to share and to go back. So thank you for doing that. And I believe that when someone hears your story, I believe that when people, the people that are listening right now, it's going to give them the courage to share, because that takes a lot of courage.
I hope so.
So thank you. Thank you for leading in vulnerability and for offering hope, like you said, because I love with your story that you said, I started researching. You've even gotten to that point where I think a lot of us find ourselves, if you haven't gotten there yet, you probably will have a dark night of the soul moment where you're going to be like, something has to change. Like things can't keep going the way that they are. And with what you shared, you help people see that there's another way. And everybody's way is different, right? I mean, everybody's healing journey is different. It's not linear. It's not this formula or this, first you do this, this, and this. I mean, obviously, if there's like an emergency, I think there's immediate emergency things. But as anything with like self-care, or when it comes to medication or any of those things, different things work for different people.
Oh, yeah.
And
I think we need, I tell my students, like, you need a giant toolbox full of tools, not just one or two things that work, but you need to find a variety of things that work. And there's going to be things that you try that don't work, and they're not for you. So
that's right. Totally. And I think too, like at different times, like there's certain things that work for, let's say, the initial shock or the initial, right where you are. And then as time goes on, you might be, switch over and add something or take away. And I think there is a sense of flexibility with the healing process, and being open to, it's okay. I don't need that anymore. And actually, I'd like to try this now. And it really requires a sense of self-awareness and listening and trusting your body's wisdom and your intuition, because really we are the only people that know what's best for us. And I think the cool thing about yoga, and especially with how you teach trauma informed, you're really giving agency back to the people, and you're helping them have this opportunity to do what's comfortable and feels right and true for them, which I think is so important. The safety, feeling safe, is so critical in the healing process.
Yeah, and I actually, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, so I know that one of our mutual favorite books, I had written down, so it goes along with it. I had written down one of my favorite quotes from Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
Bessel van der Kolk says, traumatized people chronically feel unsafe in their bodies. The past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. And that's absolutely, that's one of the reasons that especially trauma-informed yoga is so important, is because you're not going to heal until you start learning how to feel safe in your body again. Mm-hmm. So, and that's what trauma does, is it strips away all that sense of safety. It takes away our sense of control and power, all of our plans, all of our, kind of our hopes and our dreams and all that stuff. It's gone. So it's important that we can reestablish a relationship with our body, and then, make choices for ourselves again, and learn how to do that, how to make choices that are best for us and not causing more harm and trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you explain a little bit more? Maybe someone listening has never heard of the term trauma informed or trauma sensitive. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah. So trauma informed, whether you're talking about a therapist who's trauma informed or a yoga teacher who's trauma informed, somebody who's trauma informed just understands the way trauma affects not only the mind, but the body also. So, you know, different parts of the brain and as well as we hold things, especially in our hips. Our hips store the psoas muscle itself stores more more sympathetic nervous system fibers than any other muscle in the body. So things are physically, literally held in our cells and in our muscles and tissues. It's not just in our mind like we tend to think that it is. So, and that was one of the things that I think I've always kind of been aware of, but the training that I've gone through has been just incredible at validating that, because I was 22 years old when that happened, and I had all this trauma, but that the level of physical pain that manifested in my body after that continued for years, spoke volumes to how we actually hold things in the body. I mean, I can remember being in my 20s and literally feeling like I feel like I think it would feel like to be 90 years old. Wow. Just in pain, just complete exhaustion 100% of the time, just not good physically, mentally, or emotionally. So,
and I know that you are very informed on the science part of it too. So could we dive into the science the science of the trauma and the nervous system and all that?
Yeah, so I would love to. First of all, if anybody wants to learn more about all this stuff, two of my very favorite books for just kind of educating yourself on trauma in the body is The Body Keeps the Score, and that's Bessel van der Kolk, and then In an Unspoken Voice by Peter Levine. Those are my two favorites. But basically, so everybody all day long, we're supposed to be in kind of this push and pull, or this on and off of balancing the autonomic nervous system, which consists of the parasympathetic, which is our rest and digest or feed and breed. And then you've got this sympathetic nervous system, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And then there's some more terminology that's being added to that, like fawning, but I'm going to stick with fight, flight, and freeze today. Yeah. But anyway, we're supposed to kind of be in a balance all day, every day between the two of those. So, if we're driving in our car, that's not anything that is necessary. It's not a trauma, but it's something that we need our sympathetic nervous system to be. We need to be a little bit more on high alert for that, in other words. Whereas, when the car gets parked and we go inside the store, we shouldn't be in sympathetic anymore. We should be in parasympathetic, kind of calm. But what happens with trauma, especially with PTSD, is we get stuck in sympathetic. So your sympathetic nervous system gets activated, and then for a multitude of reasons, it doesn't get turned back off. I like to use the example of a T-Rex, because I don't know anybody that's going to trigger. I don't know anybody who's had a trauma with a T-Rex. So if you're sitting at home and a T-Rex all of a sudden just comes bursting through your doors, you're going to do one of three things. You're either going to run from it, you're going to fight it and try to, end that situation, or you're going to drop to fetal position. You may play dead, or you may just be frozen in fear. Either way, your hip flexors are activated. That's one of the first muscles to activate, which is one of the reasons that's kind of one of those number one big pockets for trauma. But the problem with freeze is there's no discharge of that energy, that traumatic energy. So if you were able to run from safety, you may run a couple of blocks until you can't even hear the dinosaur anymore, and you're like, You know, we made
That's
it out of
funny,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, we made it. We're good. And then your nervous system would reset. You would start breathing regularly. You'd probably take deeper breaths. If you fought the T-Rex, if you came out on top and you were the winner, then you would be the same kind of outcome. You'd be like, threats passed, I'm okay, I'm safe. But if you dropped into fetal position and there's not really any resolution to that, there's no discharge of the energy. And then let's say, like for me, I actually shared this part of my story with you the other day. There's a big problem with, and I don't mean any disrespect towards first responders or anybody who's in the job of helping, but that's part of being trauma informed is I had police officers and EMTs that night constantly telling me to calm down, telling me to stop crying, stop screaming, stop, I was upsetting my child and all this stuff. And part of that I know is a purpose. Like they have to maintain a degree of control over a situation. But when it comes to my end of it, that's me constantly trying to freeze, put my body in freeze when I'm in fight or flight. So then I'm stuffing. So that's the problem with freeze. And if you do nothing to get out of that, or if you stay stuck in that cycle, then that's when we experience prolonged trauma symptoms like PTSD, anxiety, depression, things like that. So one of the biggest tools that I teach is a shaking technique that helps to, it's using your choice. So it's not, when I talk about shaking, people are like, what? Because we don't like to let our bodies shake. We feel like we're out of control, or we associate shaking in the body with, weakness. Our egos and our culture and all these things have taught us, not to let our bodies shake, but it's actually a natural response. And it's designed to discharge that traumatic energy. So that's one of the things that I do in my trauma-informed classes is I teach all these tools to bring you out of sympathetic and back into parasympathetic and try to reset your nervous system.
Well, and I think you find that in nature.
Oh, yeah.
You see an animal attacked by a predator and it freezes. And then let's say the predator thinks that animal is dead and the predator walks away. Well, that animal's going to get up and it's going to shake. It's going to shake, literally.
Yes.
And it's crazy because the animal knows innately to do that. And then it can go back.
They don't have the ego that we have. They don't have, oh, this is weird, or this is, wrong, or I'm out of control or weak or whatever. They don't have that mentality. So they just process it and they go on about their day and they don't need a prescription afterwards. Yeah. The interesting thing is, so an animal, the term scared to death is an actual literal thing. An animal, if an animal for some reason, so like you said, if an animal is attacked by another animal, and a lot of times they'll get bored with that animal, goes into freeze, and then the predator gets bored with them because they're not, they're boring, they're just laying there frozen. If that animal kind of stays and the attacked animal is not able to get away, that animal can die because it wasn't able to release the trauma.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they die kind of instantly, or they can die instantly, whereas we develop chronic illnesses like fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis and all these autoimmune disorders and heart issues and cancer and all these things that are really trauma and stress based, I believe, almost every time. So
yeah, and it can show up in different ways too. Like different emotions can show up in different ways, and even if you're looking on it, just say like on a surface level, when I feel angry, where do I feel it? Well, I have like a burning in my chest. Or if you don't feel right or you're scared, like I have a pit in my stomach. Like you said, these different phrases actually tie and connect. We have a physical body and we have an emotional body, and they talk to each other. And the brain's constantly talking to the body. Well, the body's constantly talking to the brain too. And a lot of times our body is trying to highlight and tell us like, hey, pay attention
Yeah,
to
our
this
pain
area.
signals are that's exactly what that is. A lot of times your body's going, hello, this
Hey,
needs
this,
attention, or there's something being held here, you
yes.
know. So yeah, totally.
Can you give an example of someone who came to your class, or even for you too, like with someone who's experienced PTSD? I think a lot of us have. I know I have. And after going to, let's say one of your classes, the shaking, your release and restore class, can you give an example of someone saying, I came in this way and now I'm leaving a completely different person. I feel different.
Yeah. Um, Let me think about it. Well, so let me start with myself.
Yeah.
When I was going through training, I always like to share this story because um, when I was going through training and learned that technique, I had this, and it's funny looking back now because now in hindsight, I realize how deep in my trauma I still was that I thought that I had, you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
guess years and years after you peeled away and dealt with so many layers, but I guess I had dealt with a big enough chunk of my layers of trauma that I thought, I was like, my body's
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not gonna shake at all, you know.
Yeah.
And I shook like an earthquake. And then I was angry. And so part of that's kind of what surfaced for me. That anger is something that I tend to direct a lot of my emotions into anger. I just always have. That's one of the things that I'll continue to work on for the rest of my life, I'm sure. But yeah, I was really angry. And then that hasn't happened since. But that can be an experience. I think a lot of people are shocked that their bodies actually shake. And then they're kind of surprised at the fact that emotions truly do come up. And so I always end that technique with, well, first of all, we go into lots of things to continue balancing the nervous system after that. But I always ground them and tell them, sit with your emotions. If something came up and it's still there on the surface, then acknowledge that. Because I was so freaked out that it was just completely unexpected. And I think if I'd been told, this can, I might have been told and it didn't click, but,
Yeah.
but I think that if I had been a little bit more prepared for that, then it wouldn't have been so upsetting. But I think I was so just surprised by the whole thing that I always share with them, just sit with whatever emotions are there and they're temporary. Remember that they're temporary. You're going to continue to process and release and all that. And I think that's important for people to understand is healing is difficult. It is hard. It's not easy. It's not, you don't just start out and it's sunshine and rainbows. It typically gets really bad before it gets, you have to face those things in order for them to actually, we spend so much of our energy trying to avoid those emotions and sensations in the body that it just creates more and more disconnection. So getting back into the body is sometimes initially a little bit, or a lot of it, uncomfortable, but it's very well worth the work that, I look back now, I'm so thankful that I did not take my life. I'm so thankful that I get to share and help and witness healing from others. I work with all sorts of populations. I've got veterans, every age, every ethnicity, religion, just across the board, all the people. And that's what I believe that it should be for. I think that especially trauma-informed yoga should be accessible to everybody.
Absolutely. I'm with you. Can you give an example of how yoga, well, this is kind of two questions and they probably are going to have two big answers, but one is like how yoga helps process that trauma. I know you mentioned the shaking, but there's like example breath work, you using the breath. That's another tool in yoga that can help. What are some ways that trauma can help facilitate healing and move trauma out of the body? And how are some ways that yoga can help someone feel safe in their body? Because like we were talking about earlier, like if someone doesn't feel safe, it doesn't matter what technique they use, it's not going to work unless they feel safe. It's not going to
Correct.
work.
Yeah. Oh, so that is a big, okay. So, well, okay, let me get back to, because I answered about trauma-informed yoga, but I didn't really talk about there. Okay, so I'm trauma-informed as far as my teaching and education, but then my studio is trauma-sensitive, meaning that it is designed so that the environment itself is not triggering, or I say not triggering, it should be triggering to very, very little. There's always going to be things that are triggering to somebody. The color blue can be a trigger.
Sure.
So you're just trying to avoid as many triggers as you possibly can. So for instance, I teach at the front of the room, and nobody has doors to their backs in my studio. So that's a huge aspect of somebody having PTSD, and their ability to calm down and relax is their environment, and a huge trigger for anybody with trauma, or anybody who's military or first responder also. Sitting with your back to a door is not something that you're going to be able to do and relax. So there are no doors behind you. We've got 4 windows, but they're up so high that they just bring natural light in. In other words, there's no, we're not going to have anybody walk by the studio and peek in the windows.
Yeah.
We do very little hands-on adjustments. And when we do, we ask for permission every single time. There's just a lot of different aspects of a trauma-sensitive environment, first of all. So that in itself is important in being able to connect to your body, because if you come into a yoga studio and you're lying on the floor and there's a door behind you and then there's all these windows and the lights are bright and there's a teacher walking around the room, you're not getting in your body. Yeah. You're not going to be there. Yeah. So you're going to be external the entire time. You're not going inward.
Yes.
So that is goal number 1, is making you feel safe, welcome, and accepted. And then you've got this environment where you should be able to find any spot in the room that you can relax. And then, okay, what was the next part? Oh, and then getting back in your body. So as far as getting back in your body, that's probably the next step after that, just whether you're creating your own space or you're coming into a space. The space itself is important for healing that. Then, if you feel safe enough in your environment, and then you're given choices. So a trauma-informed class should have lots of choices. That way you can go, does that feel right for me? Or does that trigger, more trauma? So you've got all these options of, for instance, supine butterfly, where you're lying on your back. So if somebody doesn't know yoga, if you're lying on your back, feet together, your knees are wide open, that is not going to be comfortable for everybody.
Yeah.
So I may offer that pose and then offer 1 or 2 more options to do, so that you can choose one that feels right for you. It's not a one size fits all. So in a trauma informed class, you may look around the room and you've got somebody in downward dog, or somebody in child's pose, or somebody, in seated or whatever, because it's the whole non-judgment, non-competition thing is even more important in a trauma sensitive class. So that allows you to not worry about, what you should look like or what you should, be doing. It's more about just connecting to your body in a way that feels safe and right for you. And then when those things do get triggered, because you're gonna have triggers in yoga. I mean, that's just part of it. But when you feel safe in your body, you can experience triggers in a whole new way. You can learn from those triggers rather than them just completely overriding your entire system. And then, you again, you're in fight, flight, or freeze. So, did I?
No, it's amazing. Yeah, no, I'm like, yes, keep going. Yes. And you touched on all of it. And it's true. I mean, meaning like, a lot of things can come up during yoga because you are moving your body, you're using your breath, and
you're quiet and you don't have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You have the opportunity to be with yourself and be in your body. So if someone's listening to this, they're like, what does in your body mean? Right? What is in your body? Well, it means that you're tuning in. You're not listening to the external noise, and you're not listening to that strip, like on the bottom of a news, it's like the constant chatter and all that.
Yes.
That really goes away. And that's why when you go to a yoga class, say, come back to your breath and listen to your breath, because that's what helps you get into the present moment. And when you're in the present moment, you're more aware and you can listen. And so for people listening, if maybe they haven't practiced yoga very much, or maybe this is the first time for them to really see yoga as a form of healing as opposed to just an exercise. Can you give some examples just so they're familiar, like you were talking about earlier, some feelings and emotions that come up? So, like some people with hip openers and stuff, like pigeon pose, or they might find themselves like tearing up, like, why am I crying in this pose? Or, what are some other emotions or some things that can come up for someone when they're practicing?
I think anything. I've had the first thing that I thought of when you said that is I had a lady come up to me after class one day, and she shared that she came to me with, I had the most random memory, and I was like, well,
yeah.
Well, yeah, and I actually didn't ask her to elaborate. Do that. Did, but I was kind of like, it probably wasn't so random. It's probably something that you've been holding that you just didn't know. But she had this childhood memory of losing a pet, and she said that just tears just streamed down. But it seemed strange to her because she was like, I was like 6 years old, and there's been a ton of other traumas and like much, much bigger stuff that's happened since then. Why did that come in? And I was like, there's something that you were holding, you were still holding some aspect of that memory. So it's not, I even tell people that you don't even always know. That's one of the most beautiful things about what I do, in my opinion, is that it requires no talking. I don't have to know any of your trauma. I don't have to know your story.
That's right.
I'm getting in touch with your body, and I'm keeping you connected to your body.
Yes.
Rather than, and that's a big part. I think that's important to mention too, is so if you go to a therapist, a therapist who's not considered trauma informed, and I know that that's confusing too, because people think, well, it's a therapist, it's a mental health therapist, shouldn't they know about trauma? There's been so much that has changed and so much research that's come to light in the past decade or so that trauma informed is a level up, in my opinion, from the norm. I had the first therapist that I went to had me do CPT, which is cognitive processing therapy, which is actually proven to be, it can be more detrimental than helpful to somebody who's experienced trauma. So that is, in my instance, she had me write a letter to the murderers and read it over and over and over, with the idea that it would desensitize me to the whole story. And all that's doing is it's traumatizing you over and over and over, and it's creating more and more disconnect. So when you go to a trauma-informed therapist or a trauma-informed yoga class, you're going to work from what's called bottom-up therapy. That's a bottom-up type of therapy, whereas if you go to just a therapist who's not trauma-informed, that's considered a top-down. So they start with your head, and they want you to talk about it, but you can't communicate or fully process your trauma from your brain until it's processed through the body. So it's important that you at least incorporate some sort of bottom-up approach to trauma when trying to heal. But yeah, literally anything can come up. So, yeah.
And that's true. And like you said, it's very personal. So
Yeah, you
You know,
hold
and
things in different places too. So
yes,
that's part of it is always, I'm constantly cueing, like, notice your emotions and where you feel that in the body. So it
yeah,
helps you identify your triggers. It helps you to learn where am I holding this stress? And that way you realize if you have those thoughts associated with that stress, then you can soften or move that part of your body, or
yeah,
vice versa. If you start having issues in your body, you go, oh, am I subconsciously, if you start paying more attention to your thoughts, you may not even notice that that's where your head's at. So it connects the two, and that's what we mean by putting us in our body.
yeah. That's right.
Out of the head and into the body. So
Yeah,
we spend a lot of time, up here in our thoughts.
it's true. And
Yeah.
it's amazing how powerful that moment can be when you stop and listen. Because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times we don't. We're on go, go, go. We're taking care of family or doing work or whatever it is. And sometimes, it's not until you stop and listen that you're like, wow, my shoulders are so tense. Or like, why is my lower back,
Yeah.
or it could be more than just how you're sitting. I mean, there's a lot of,
Exactly. Yeah.
factors that go into it. But I guess the thing is we'd want to encourage people. Yes, there's a lot of factors, and remember your emotions too, or remember things that have happened to you on a trauma level, because trauma is very relative. Like I know some people that they're like, well, I'm not a veteran, or I'm not a first responder.
Oh gosh,
I don't
I hear that all the
I
time.
have PTSD or why.
Yeah. I've never had any trauma, and then they'll list like 7 traumas. And I'm like, yes, you
Yes,
do.
you do. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I think
Yes.
everybody has trauma. I mean, maybe with the exception of some children, but
Yeah.
even children, we inherit
Yeah.
trauma in our DNA. So
Yeah.
we
That is
really all have trauma. What did you say?
yes, that's a whole nother
Yeah.
yes, that
Oh,
we could have another talk because yes, that is very true. And it's
yeah.
but the beautiful thing in the hope is that you don't just experience trauma in your body, you can experience healing in your body as well.
Yes.
Like we were talking about earlier, you experience it's visceral, it's intense, and it happens, and you're able to release it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
knowing how to do that. It's not weird. You're not crazy. If you have thought like maybe what did happen to me is creating this physical manifestation of body, you're not crazy, because it's true. And so thank you for breaking that down, for breaking down what trauma is, what trauma informed and trauma sensitive is, and how yoga can help. And that it really is a beautiful practice to help facilitate your journey. And there's no timeline where, well, if you come to a trauma informed class, you better be, by this time, it's not like that. It's very much whatever you're comfortable with and where you are. And I think that's what's so beautiful, is that it's such a patient process and practice. Now I may not be patient, but the yoga is like,
Yeah.
like
We're usually not very patient.
we're not as, but the mat is always there,
Yep.
and sometimes someone's yoga practice might be being in child pose and crying, and like, there you go. That might be your practice. It doesn't have to be, dripping sweat. I mean, there's lots of different forms and lots of different ways. And again, just to validate people and whatever their yoga practice looks like, it's not meant to be like you would see in the magazines or even on some like Instagram accounts of people doing crazy poses. That's not, yeah. That's not what yoga is about. But unless we share these things and help people understand, like, there's different ways to access healing in your body, and that there are people out there who want to help. There's people there who want to help facilitate and hold that space. So thank you, Toni, for being one of those people and for informing us and helping us better understand how the gift of yoga can help us, how it's helped you personally. Thank you again for sharing your journey and for opening up.
For all that you're doing.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, I want people to be able to find you. So I know you have social media, you got a website, and you're in Longview. So tell people how they can reach you.
Okay. freedomyogainc.com is our website. Facebook, it's Freedom Yoga Longview, and then Instagram, it's Freedom Yoga Inc.
That's awesome. And like, I know with COVID and everything, so is your studio, are you doing both? Are you open and having online, or what do you have available right now?
We're actually all just back to in person.
Okay.
We're still at limited numbers, limited capacity, but yeah, we're back to in person. We kind of bailed on the online. We intend to get back to it. We're not there yet. So yeah, we're
it's different in person, truly.
Oh yeah, there's nothing beats in person.
You can't compare to it. I mean, you can definitely do yoga online, but there's just something about being in the room with fellow yogis practicing and having a teacher like yourself that offers that safe space. There's nothing like it. So, well, friend, thank you again. It was awesome. Thank you for sharing everything and being a part of the event again. And I do want to,
always be a part of the event.
Before we end, can you share really quick about your heart and passion for sound therapy and sound bowls and how you bring that in your studio?
So that's actually, okay. So I've picked up all these tools, for myself. And that's typically what I'll do is I'll share mostly what I've used and what works for me. I teach a couple of things that don't work for me and that I don't like just because they do work for other people. But sound therapy, the very first sound therapy class I went to, that was the most beautiful combination of staying connected to your body. You literally cannot disconnect from your body, I don't think, in a sound class because you're feeling the vibration and you're hearing the sound. So it's a different type of meditation to me that it creates. And this is just from the mind body aspect, I guess. It keeps you connected to that sound. And so you can't, or to me, I can't get distracted by my thoughts or whatever. I am forced to stay with my thoughts and be observant of them and observant of the sounds, because there's some sounds that you're like, what even was that? And then, it's different tones and different sounds that you've maybe never heard before. But then on the kind of sciencey side of that, you'd be the best one to talk about that. But you know how much it literally puts your parasympathetic nervous system in dominance, in control. Oh, yeah. And how many was days for you, wasn't it?
After your first? It was my first sound bowl was like sound bowl session or sound bath, I should say. I was like, it was 4 days. I was full on. Someone could have, I don't know, a T-Rex could have come after me and it wouldn't even like phase to me. But truly, like, I was getting neurofeedback treatments at that time, and I happened to have a treatment scheduled 2 days after the sound bowl session. And when you get neurofeedback, they can see your brain waves and how everything's doing. He's like, you have zero sympathetic activity. Like,
I love it.
And I was like, I know, I feel like $1 million. Is this what people feel like that don't struggle with anxiety? And like, but it was, yes, very much so. It was life-changing. Yes. Yeah. So I went and got some sound bowls and things after that, because I wanted to incorporate that in my own practice. And that's why last year I was like, Toni, you have to please bring the gong and the bowls, because I wanted everyone to experience that. And it was just really beautiful.
I actually chose the gong. I don't know if I've told you this or not, but the gong, the part of the reason that I loved that gong, I had to have that particular gong, so Mars gong. And so Mars, the gong itself is tuned to the same frequency as Mars. Mars, that frequency is associated with the root chakra.
Oh, wow.
And the root chakra is the first chakra to get, out of balance.
Yes. And that's your survival. That's like,
That's our whole sense of, who you are. And So those deep tones are very
Yes.
grounding, and then you've got some that are very, because when you have PTSD, so for instance, PTSD, you've got depression and anxiety. Some people who don't have PTSD will have depression, some will have anxiety, some can have both. But if you've got PTSD, you've got both. So you have to balance how you treat that, because with depression, it can be a little too grounding. So you've got to kind of tune into the spaces and that kind of thing. Whereas if you're anxious, then you need that ground. So you got to kind of balance the two. But that's another thing that sound classes do, is it keeps, you've got low tones and you've got high tones and you've got all these sounds, and it's just keeping you connected to your body while your body's receiving this cellular massage.
Yes.
Vibrating all the water in your cells, and it's just calming your entire system down. So beautiful.
I know.
I love it. Love it.
It is. And you offer them at your studio. I mean, you have sound baths at your studio.
We try to have at least 2 sound classes a month. We have been doing Reiki, so gentle yoga plus Reiki plus sound. Those classes are, they usually sell out quickly. We usually pack that class out. That is probably one of our very most favorite classes at the studio.
That's beautiful. Man, that's awesome. Thank you for offering all that to the community.
Oh, I love it.
You can access those things because there aren't a lot of those classes. So that's awesome.
I know, and I don't think people realize like how fortunate we are to have that in these cities. I mean, a lot of the stuff is super hard to find even in big cities.
I know. No, it's true. Because you would either have to go to Dallas or Austin or somewhere to experience something like that. So oh, friend, I appreciate you. Thanks again for everything, for sharing.
Love you.
I love you too. And I'm just so grateful we got to connect again. And everybody who watched, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out Toni. Check out her studio. She has lots of stuff to offer and a wide range. And I hope you guys walk away feeling encouraged and knowing that we're here to support you in your journey. You are not alone, and we're sending our love. Thanks again.
Thank you.